Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And before we get into the video this morning, I do want to encourage you to go to my website, donkpreston.com, and just check out the hundreds, thousands even, articles that are there for your consideration, for your study. I have books, DVDs, MP3s available for download, obviously purchase. And, but there's just a wealth of information there that you're not going to find a whole lot of other places. I can assure you that. I have people contact me all the time expressing their appreciation for the websites that I have. Again, eschatology.org, donkpreston.com, because it's just a gold mine of information, of articles, and they're all free for download. They're all free for printing. Okay. Now, if you decide to copy and publish any of my articles, which you're welcome to do, by the way, just make sure you give proper journalistic accreditation. I know of a couple of situations in which people copied and pasted my articles, and actually they engaged in plagiarism. They just published my material under their own name. I could tell you a story of that, and I will. I was traveling on my way to California on one occasion, stopped on a Wednesday night to attend services. And we went in and we were sitting there, and minister was up teaching, and there were outlines laying in the pews. Now, this many years ago, but anyway, I picked up one of the outlines, and it was a pretty thick production, and I was reading it, and I'm going, "That's my stuff. I wrote this." And I looked and I looked and I looked for a name. And the only name I found on it was his. This guy had literally copied my material, put his name on it, and was distributing it to his congregation as if he wrote it. That's called theft. It's called plagiarism. It's called lying. And that's just not a good thing to do. But I digress. Okay. So anyway, feel free, copy and paste, share the material that is there. But again, have integrity, give proper accreditation, give honor to whom honor is due. That's the biblical way of doing things. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, all right, what I want to do today, last Thursday, I took note of the fact that one of the objections that has been lodged against my book, Temple to Telos, is the fact that God set the time. Here's the book. It's available on my website. And so take advantage of it. The reviews so far, with the obvious exception of some objections that I'm taking a look at. But one of the objections, and some people have said, "Oh, this is the strongest objection possible," is that the temple itself was destroyed in 70 AD in the month of Elul, and the month for the fulfillment of the final three feast days is Tishri. Well, the temple, according to the chronology that I have, and this is really, really interesting, there are different views of it. It doesn't vary tremendously, but I get different people saying, "Well, this happened here and this happened then," and et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, David Mumjean, I am eager to read your suggestion. So if you're watching this, please send me an email outlining your chronology. I'm very, very eager to read that. And by the way, Soteriology 400, you've made some really intriguing comments on YouTube under my videos. I could do this without some of the sarcasm, but okay. But you made some really intriguing comments. So outline it with some documentation. Just simply saying this is true and that's true, blah, 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 really doesn't prove it. We need some documentation. So anyway, the objection has been lodged. Preston, you say the temple had to be standing for the fulfillment of the final 3 feast days. What I have said, what I have emphasized over and over and over again, is that there is not a perfect one-to-one correspondence between this physical standing of the temple and the fulfillment of the feast days, because after all, the temple was destroyed in 586 BC, but the feast days were not fulfilled at that time. My argument has been, and is, Hebrews chapter 9, 6-10 is more than emphatic. The Old Covenant cultus, all right, the laws concerning the feast days, the new moons, the feast days, the Sabbaths, the meats, the drinks, the divers washings, that cultus, that law would remain valid until the time of Reformation, which is the time of the fulfillment. So the cultus had to remain binding, imposed. And so the suggestion that I have made, which I stand by until evidence is produced to the contrary, is that in Matthew chapter 4:21, Jesus, speaking of the time of the tribulation. Now, what is the time of tribulation, ladies and gentlemen? It's the time of Rosh Hashanah, the time of judgment, which will lead directly to Yom Kippur and, of course, Sukkot. My argument has been God shortened the days. Now, I pointed out last week that those who are making the objections are really arguing over a few weeks. Well, someone pointed out, well, that's almost too much, Preston. Well, it's from the month of Elul, either the 8th or the 10th, whichever chronology you accept. So let's just stretch it to the 10th. From the 10th of Elul, when the temple was, quote, officially destroyed, the temple was still burning 2 weeks later, which brings us to what? Oh, basically the beginning of Tishri and the initiation of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. Yet nonetheless, I have argued that Jesus said, except those days, the days of the tribulation, the days of the judgment, except those. Now look, unless you can divorce Jesus' discussion of the tribulation from the concept of Rosh Hashanah, i.e. judgment, then this is absolutely applicable. Nobody's tried. So what was the response to my argument that Jesus, in talking about the tribulation / Rosh Hashanah, was applicable to everything being fulfilled in Elul? I was told that's ridiculous. That's not possible. You're suggesting that God changed his laws. That is not possible. Well, I understand what's being said here. I even have a certain degree of empathy with the argument, but here's the problem. Let's look at just a couple of examples that would indicate that the argument, the objection here, is not as solid as people want to say. And it's not as ridiculous as they say. It's not as foolish as they claim. And it's not as false as they claim. Let's see. Exodus chapter 20. 6 days you shall labor, and the 7th day you shall do no work at all. Whoever shall labor on the 7th day, i.e. the Sabbath, shall surely be put to death. Now, I tell you what, there's a law for you, right? Hard, fast, concrete, inalterable, right? Not really. What did Jesus say? Which of you, when they were accusing Jesus of violating the law, which of you, having an ox, if it falls into the ditch, will not go and get him out? Why did God allow that? For mercy's sake. In Matthew chapter 12, Jesus and his apostles were walking through grain fields on the Sabbath, and his apostles were stripping some of the grains and eating them, and the Pharisees they had an absolute fit. Your apostles are reaping. They're working in violation of the Sabbath. The parallel is in Mark chapter 2. And Jesus said, you guys just don't get it. Do you not remember when David was fleeing from Saul? He went into the tabernacle. Pardon me. And there ate the showbread, which is fit only for the priests, and he did so. Here's a violation of the law. Why was that allowed? For mercy's sake. So you have here a hard, fast law. And then you have the example of the observance of the feast days. Did you know that God allowed, he set the time for the feast days, but did you know that God allowed provision for those who are unable because of sickness or stress or, whatever, to observe the feast days at different times, 30 days later? And then you have this absolutely remarkable situation in Jeremiah chapter 3, and actually it's based upon a hard, fast rule in Deuteronomy chapter 24. And Yahweh in Jeremiah chapter 3 echoes that law. He is addressing Judah and Jerusalem. They have apostatized. They have committed spiritual adultery. And the 10 northern tribes had committed spiritual adultery approximately 230 years earlier. And now Judah and Jerusalem is not only following in the footsteps of the 10 northern tribes, she's become worse. Pardon me. But the Lord says, they say, that is, scribes, etc., if a man divorces his wife, which the Lord had done with the 10 northern tribes, Malachi chapter 2, and she goes from him and becomes another man's, may he return to her again? Rhetorical question. Would not that land be greatly polluted? You played the harlot with many lovers. Catch the power of this. Yet return to me, says the Lord. Now, what happened with Hosea? Israel committed spiritual adultery. She became a harlot, a spiritual harlot, just like Judah here in Jeremiah chapter 3. What did God do? He wrote her a bill of divorcement, sent her away. She sold herself, and by the way, Gomer was told to marry a wife of whoredoms. He did. She became unfaithful. He divorced her. She went out and, her beauty faded and whatever, but he still loved her. So the Lord said, go and marry her. Take her back, but do not go into her sexually for a while. And he said, go purchase her. And he went to the marketplace where Gomer had just devolved. Now, no one wanted her. Her beauty had faded. She is being sold to the highest bidder. And Hosea paid 15 pieces of silver for her. He took her back. That's a violation of the law. That law is inviolable. That's God's law. You can't break God's law. Why did God tell Hosea to break the law? Because of mercy. And now here in Jeremiah, the same situation is being played out. Judah and Jerusalem is playing the harlot. And God said, doesn't the law say you can't take a woman back after you put her away? Yet return to me. Why? Because of mercy. Do you see a train coming here? Matthew 24:21. Speaking of the Great Tribulation. And the Lord said, except those days be shortened. Why would God shorten the time of Rosh Hashanah? Could it possibly be for mercy? If not, why not? And why does that not have application to the fulfillment of the final 3 feast days? You see, we sometimes get in our head that God is not sovereign. And sometimes it seems to me that we lose sight of the track we lose sight of the reality of God's incredible mercy and grace. You know, I'm reminded of Genesis chapter 8. After the flood, God looked down upon all the devastation, the death, and the destruction, and he said, Genesis 8:21, even though the thought and intent of man is to do evil continually, I will never again destroy every living creature as I have done. So what's the normal interpretation of that? Well, okay, and this is the view that I taught for years. God said, I'm never going to again, I'll never again destroy every living creature as I have done. That means I won't do it by flood, but the next time around, I'll just do it by fire. But wait a minute. You see, when God destroyed the world by the flood, he didn't destroy all the fish. He only destroyed every creature that breathed air. Okay. The next time around, we are told, and I used to preach, he's going to destroy every single living creature. He's even going to burn up the fish. But he said, I will never again destroy every living creature as I've done. So we turn it into an issue of magnitude, that God is more concerned about magnitude than he is mercy. Perhaps, just perhaps, the issue in Genesis chapter 8 is not some hard, fast rule about fire or about method, in other words. Instead, it's all about God's mercy. And so I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the objection to my book, in which I suggest, and as I have done in my videos, that when Jesus said, except those days, what are those days, ladies and gentlemen? I suggested in the video last week. I'm suggesting it again this week. Unless you can prove that the Great Tribulation was not in any way related to Rosh Hashanah and the fulfillment of Rosh Hashanah, unless you can prove that definitively, then it virtually proves that Jesus is referenced, except those days, i.e., the days of Rosh Hashanah and Judgment, except those days be shortened, which is just another way of saying, except the days for the fulfillment of the feast days is shortened. Instead of the divinely appointed time, they'll be fulfilled earlier. Why? Because of mercy. So it seems to me like, in order for the objection to have any validity whatsoever, we have to, number one, prove no relationship between Rosh Hashanah and the tribulation. And number two, we have to be able to prove that the days would not be shortened as a result of God's mercy. Okay, I think that's sufficient for today. Don't forget, tomorrow we get back to responding to Steve Gregg's book, Why Not AD 70? We will see you on the flip side.